Okay, why don't we get started? My name is Samir Ghosh. I've been working in tech for over 35 years, big companies like Microsoft, IBM, P&G. I've been in 7 startups, 3 exits, 2 are ongoing, and currently CEO of a company called Envoq. We're a product and services company that helps businesses leverage GenAI in production. And why are we here? We've seen a lot of early experimentation in enterprises with GenAI and have learned a lot about the complexities of getting beyond POCs and pilots. And we have panelists that have been very generous to share some of the lessons that they've learned at AWS, GE, Uber. We've got Bhavesh Mehta from Uber, Selvan Senthivel from previously at GE and AWS, Ted Leis, CTO of Envoq. So thank you very much for spending the time doing this. Now, we received a lot of questions. To be honest, to manage everybody's time, be respectful of everybody's time, we booked 45 minutes and maybe some Q&A at the end. I don't think we're going to get to all of them. We'll do the best we can. So to kick things off, there's people are familiar with the hype cycle, like Gartner has kind of made popular. There's a lot of news about Gen AI is in the trough of disillusionment. Gone up to the height of hype and back down. So my question openly to the panel is, how about this Gen AI stuff? Is it up to the hype? Anybody?
Yeah, I can quickly jump in here. This is Bhavesh Mehta. Just quick background, I'm leading the GenAI strategy at Uber, but I've had opportunity to architect and scale various GenAI platforms and workflows across a range of use cases. And we have gone through this, I would say, hype cycle multiple times now. When ChatGPT launched, of course, its natural ability to seemingly answer anything and everything with decent accuracy level at that time made people think, hey, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and we can integrate into any of our workflow, and it will lead to magical solutions. Largely, it has not. However, this is not to say there is no value. In fact, it just means to say identifying the use cases where there has been value has not been a linear journey. And we'll be talking about more about that in this webinar, as well as to how to go about that. Hype definitely comes from the expectation and reality gap, and in many use cases we have seen it not just meet but exceed expectations. In some use cases, not so much.
Any other? Yeah, thanks, Bhavesh. Any other thoughts on Gen AI and up to the hype?
Yeah, I'm going to ask now. I'm Selvan. I used to work for AWS and then GE before. I would run some AWS services like Comprehend, SageMaker, a few things. I mean, like what Bhavesh was mentioning, right? There are certain areas which excels really well. There is a planning and reasoning part, it doesn't do very well, actually. So that still needs a human intervention on that particular part. There are some use cases we can talk about it maybe, with other things. I can give you examples where specifically it does really, really well, and where potentially it may lead us to, Yeah. Nice to meet you all.
Ted, do you have any thoughts about whether it's up to the hype?
I think the hype is real.
Okay. I mean, obviously we're all drunk the Kool-Aid here, but why don't we dive in more specifically into the ROI and use cases? I love hearing about the unique use cases. And in fact, I tweet personally on some of these use cases. Recently, there was one I heard, Microsoft actually uses Gen AI to look through their entire organization and will find people who should meet, other coworkers that should meet, and suggest not just, this is more than those random kind of Slack bots that would say, hey, you two should have coffee by random. It would look at the actual data, look at what they're doing, say you should be meeting, and here's the things you should be talking about. I just saw on the news, this thing called Granny Scam Baiter voice bot that some of the telcos are putting in place that will actually take scammers and basically tie them up for 40 minutes. Anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. So let me ask you, how do you identify the best use case? This is something we've seen come up over and over again with the greatest ROI. There's so much attention and on this topic of ROI. Bhavesh, what do you think about that?
Yeah, at Uber we have deployed GenAI in customer support automation, agent assist optimizations. We also deployed GenAI across a range of internal productivity tools. GitHub Copilots for developer, of course, but other just lots and lots of assistance. This work has really allowed me to see the challenges of why identifying the use case is tough, and we'll talk about why it's challenging to begin with, and but also what it takes to scale securely and how to drive adoption. So before I answer how to identify use cases, let me answer why it's such a difficult task. This prompt engineering has taken the world by the storm, and it's almost deceptive. It's definitely very easy to get started, and for trivial use case, it yields desired outcomes. But it's highly experimental and very, very iterative. And the field itself is evolving. Your techniques from even 6 months ago are not valid anymore, or there are much easier techniques available. Other myth is, you actually don't quite know when your prompts are working. You need rigorous evaluation frameworks, and probably you need continuous evaluation to make sure your prompts continue to work. And let's assume you nail the right prompts, and then you may think, okay, I can just target it against any model, and it will work. Prompts, unfortunately, they are very model specific, and for other business reasons, if you choose to switch to, let's say, from OpenAI to Envoq, you will need to do a bunch of rework pretty much from scratch. And this is just scratching the surface. Now, let's say you find the perfect prompt in the model and launch the product. Are you really done? There are a lot of open questions. How are you going to serve the models? What are the SLAs, latency, accuracy, availability that are acceptable for use case? What are the privacy considerations? How are you going to experiment with different models? Is there a neat use case for you to continue experimenting? What frameworks are you going to use to leverage, like LangChain, Llama Index? What is your vector DB solution? How are you going to scale the solution? How are you going to keep the data pipeline fresh? What is the context window required for your use case? How do you work around that limitation? How do you monitor? What is your overall observability story? I mean, these are all the questions that most customers, when they start on the journey, they are not even aware of, and they sort of uncover peeling off an onion way. But all of these questions, they will need to be somewhat satisfactorily answered before you can talk about, before you're confident you have identified a use case that meets your ROI expectation. So these are the range of challenges that are blocking, in a way, for you to get to the ROI questions in the first place. Now, what is the answer here, right? You will need to have sort of answers for your company, for your use cases. But one common theme that I see emerge is you need platform thinking, which means that you start with a robust model gateway that allows you to tap into Google models, OpenAI models, your own internal models as well, create abstraction layer, right, authentication, you said monitoring, etc. Now you enhance, now you have an ability to talk to a model. Model output is going to be only as good as the data you supply. So you need some RAG frameworks. Put the right embedding model, vector DB, create the data pipeline that remains fresh to give you the most accurate answers. Then you need sort of a prompt library or a prompt management solution, so that you have version control, you have iteration, you have an evaluation framework that works across prompts and models to give you in real time what works and what doesn't work. You need guardrails again, as a platform component that, masks your private information, but also works on your outputs so that it doesn't inadvertently blurt out any toxic or misleading information that can compromise your brand. And then, depending on the use cases, you need an ability to break that use cases into much smaller tasks and have a routing or orchestration that targets the right model for the right task. And of course, now you apply the traditional or classic platform considerations as well, optimization, caching, observability, monitoring, security, compliance, all of that. And finally, you need to expose this model to your developers with ease. And ease could be user-friendly interfaces to author the perfect automation experience or your internal application. So there's a lot of questions to be answered. There's a lot of complexity in the platform itself, and that is why it's definitely hard identifying those use cases.
Let me ask you this though, because particularly, my understanding, your responsibility is mostly around customer service, correct? So that's
Correct.
That's the obvious use case that everybody talks about, right? I mean, I sort of have this view that the best value are the ones around use cases that are very differentiated within the company, that are strategic to the company. Are we going to know what that is? Is it, do you sit around and wait to see for the industry to tell you what use case, or do you want to allow the businesses to experiment? I mean, what's the right way to find these use cases?
Yeah, I mean, you can wait for the industry to tell you, then you are not an innovator. If you want to innovate, and industry may not have answer for your particular business.
Right.
Since you talked about customer support, it is, in my opinion, a hand-in-glove fit for GenAI, because GenAI deals with language, customer support deals with language, and it's about, appropriately communicating after you detect the right human emotion and the intent behind the reach. However, unless you experiment, and Uber, we have blogged about this, we have conducted many hackathons where we just gave this range of tools, models to people, and have them think about creative ideas and prove to, first of all, themselves that it works. And that has been the single most I would say differentiator in coming up with ideas that really work. But how do you allow experimentation at scale? It's not just about, okay, well, here is the budget and you can tap into your model of choice. It requires investment into platforms. Now, of course, luckily for Uber, we have been investing into AI platform for a while. Michelangelo, the industry leading platform, and we have documented and we talked about it in public many times, has given us a leg up. We also improved on it from becoming ML platform to GenAI, introducing some of the services and capabilities that I just talked about, and it has been instrumental in allowing for that rapid experimentation as well.
Anybody else on thoughts on identifying use cases?
Yeah, I think there's like a hidden ROI. I think that's one of the things that is actually a tangible value right now, where people are getting time back, right? Like over the last few years doing ML and AI, just for me personally on the technical side, I'm getting shortcutted and time back from just getting answers from questions into GenAI. I mean, just using ChatGPT has made a huge difference. I think if companies aren't using that, and some aren't because of security and security and privacy concerns, but even standing up your own model in a, what you probably all the companies already have, like an Amazon or Azure platform. I mean, you can stand up your own model, create a private model that doesn't talk to anything and can't be reached by anything. It's your company model, right? So even companies that can't use public Gen AI platforms like OpenAI, I think, like ChatGPT, I think they should be experimenting with, internal models. The amount of time you get back, especially for developers, Microsoft is saying there's tens in the tens of time back, or the amount of code that's generated by AI. So if you're not using that to facilitate your daily work, I think you're not doing yourself justice or the company. And then the company benefits because you're more productive. Your productivity has gone up, quite a bit. And then you get that time back. The company gets that time back as a resource for you as well.
I think Microsoft recently published the amount of GenAI generated code on GitHub might be surpassing now the human written code. And then I take a little issue, Bhavesh. I think that we do human interaction, natural language, all kinds of use cases, not just customer service. So I think there's a bunch. Selvan, anything else to add around use cases, identifying ROI?
Yeah, I mean, on the ROI part, right, I think starting with the P&L helps a lot. Yeah. Starting with the P&L document, like, what specific problem is trying to solve, whether GenAI fits into that. So a lot of problems I have seen both in GE and then even in the AWS world also, GenAI plays a part in a workflow. For example, like now in old school way, you write a program, it goes through a serial bunch of these things and then control statements and then it goes through, right? Here you have even more dimensions to it. For example, if you use a multimodal vision model, right? So then you have an abstraction from a chart. And now then you have a progress notes of a patient. Now you can actually extract the instructions right there and predict for a forecasting problem. So for example, in a hospital, there's an emergency department. I want to predict the flow of patients coming in, right? In the old school way, you use a deep AR, those kind of models, and then put the features in. But in the LLM world, you can add the patient notes and you can understand it, what's happening. And the patient notes may have the checklist. And based on that, you can predict even better, actually. Okay, the patient is done with all these things, then they are going to move, right? There are quite a lot of use case comes up, from that point. The return on investment, if you can start from the P&L and tie it to a business unit, that actually goes a long way. For internal productivity, like Bhavesh and Ted mentioned, right? I think there's quite a lot of improvement I can see actually on the development time going down significantly in the current startup I work. For example, just creating a voice agent, we initially thought it takes 10 hours. We should in 2 hours actually. You can talk more about the production part. Doing it as an initial part is one thing, but taking it to production, there's a huge leap actually.
Right.
Yeah. For example, if you want to pick up a problem, in GE, we worked on a specific problem on servicing team, right? GE produced a ton of hardware. The service team need to go through a bunch of manuals if there's an issue, right? So these are terabytes of data, and then they need to pick up a very specific for a specific issue and a specific parts, right? Sometimes if you don't get to the right manual, you want to pick up the right parts. So that's actually, you order more parts than needed and there's a wastage of then that's the one productivity part. Then also the accuracy and the quality of that part, right, matters quite a bit. Like what Bhavesh mentioned, I think the evaluation framework, it's much more significant. Just like test-driven development kind of thing we do, evaluate along with the development, and then that's pretty critical. Then the additional complexity also comes from the deployment pipelines. We have beta, gamma, and prod environments. How do you promote it? What is the logic needed for that? Functional integration test, regression test. On top of it, with the GenAI dynamism, with the agent framework and all these things, there need to be more rigorous testing on top of it, right? So those are the additional complexities comes with the production, taking it to production. On the ROI point of view, thinking through the problem end to end, how it's going to be, that helps a lot.
Yeah, I wonder if the audience can tell that these gentlemen are pretty far along in this. I mean, what we see a lot of companies are starting. They start very early, right? They start very. You might start with ChatGPT or what have you, and then have policies internally once employees start uploading documents. IT or compliance gets involved. What do you see as the adoption sort of process? How does a company progress in its maturity of adoption of GenAI? Where do they start? How should they think about progressing? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I can chime in here. Because GenAI and AI in general is not a deterministic technology, and GenAI certainly has made that non-determinism more public. Hallucination, a term everybody now recognizes and understands what that is. Then hallucination can lead to incorrect answers. I mean, that's just a fact uh, or factoid about it. What that incorrect answer means for you and your business, that's a entirely different ballgame altogether. For example, in customer support, it can mean you got more refund than you deserved. It could mean the bot that you are interacting with said something to compromise brand. It can also mean let's say if you're talking with a legal help bot, it can give you just plain incorrect information, and now you have some legal problems awaiting you. What is your risk appetite? Your meaning, what is your company's business risk appetite? And I think I see that decision driving pretty much how the adoption takes place in your organization. But typically, risk is never zero. There's always risk. Most risk-averse organization or most organizations starting really early in the GenAI journey, they will start with internal use cases. Like you mentioned, get subscription to ChatGPT or equivalent products, Perplexity, start trying it out and see, get a feel for it. And not just your individual contributor. I think I've seen all the way up to executives to, get a hands-on experience about it so that they can start developing intuition around potential capabilities they can drive here. Get developer tools like GitHub Copilot, Cursor, and see how it impacts your developer ecosystem. Get other tools like Query GPT, which helps you write text English to SQL queries. The common theme or commonality across all of these tools is outcome is never exposed to the end customer directly. There's always human in the loop. Take programming copilots, for example. And generate some code. You as the developer are the first line of defense if it generates incorrect code. Well, not just you. Most companies have a barrage of the tests that you can run against that generated code to validate the logic, accuracy, etc. Only after it passes through all those gates, you push the code and now the functionality of the feature is available to the end user. Similarly, if you are using any automated analysis tools, it will give you what it thinks the analysis is. There's still a person involved. That person, in a way, serves two jobs. One is to actually make sure that the output is correct and modify the output when it's not correct. But more importantly for your company, it is reducing the risk. Now, once you go through this exercise and you say, okay, these are the pockets where we feel actually quite comfortable that let's say throwing out a number here, 90% accuracy is good enough. Well, that's a great use case for full automation. Meaning you feed something, maybe you perfected the prompts, you tune those prompts, you fine tune those models, you have the data guiding the behavior to get to that accuracy. Of course, going through not just one time, but continuous evaluation process. But now you have human completely out of the loop. But that takes a lot of investment upfront, and that's the journey I see based on the risk profile that you have for your business.
And Uber's gone. I take it Uber's gone through that because you now have GenAI talking directly to customers, correct?
Correct.
So that's the path you went through. Okay.
Yeah. But it was not on day one. We have gone through this journey, and I would argue that we have gone through this journey sort of in an industry-leading fashion, going through a lot of the steps that I talked about with quick iteration, thanks to the platform investments as well. And we launched now customer-facing bots, which are powered by GenAI.
One of the things that I hear a lot is our SaaS vendors are adding AI capabilities, right? Our CRM, our ERP, our ticketing system. Is that sufficient? I mean, why not just? This all sounds risky. Why not just wait for your existing application vendors to add AI or GenAI to their applications? Is that any thoughts on that? Anybody?
I think the providers will add features. I mean, they're definitely going to add rich features.
Clearly, yeah.
but it's going to take time. And like a lot of these companies, I mean, they're all, there's now, AI toothbrushes, right? Like, but it's the marketing component, right? But what's the real application? It's going to take time for companies to adopt those. Larger companies are going to take longer. Will those capabilities, are they going to, be what you wanted, right? Um, and, so I think again, waiting around, if you're not implementing something now, you're probably not doing something, you're probably not doing yourself a favor. And you can probably guarantee that your competitors are doing something.
Selvan, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, um, I'll go to the parts that start covered by Ted and Bhavesh. Now, see like three different parts to it for a enterprise or a mid-level to enterprise level companies, right? One is like education, on the within the internal folks on the legal side, HR side, and all these things, right? Um, because the sourcing agreement with the providers like OpenAI and then AWS matters a lot actually. When there is a legal issue or something, the sourcing agreement is what helps you to defend when you're making the final product, right? When you're talking about production here, that's one part. And then the need for abstraction, there need to be like an abstraction layer. Companies need to build on top of it. The reason is this is like this field is changing quite a bit, and then the tools are also changing a lot, right? That's the second part which is very critical for that. Then the third is more on evaluation and production. I think Bhavesh already covered that part quite a bit. So how just like the ML ops in the classical inference world versus this dynamical part right now, right? There's an active learning loop all happening, and then agent frameworks are all coming in, right? This dynamism is making it a little bit more complicated and also improving the accuracy along with that, right? So that last part, I think, need to be the major one, like out of the three parts, right? Need to be covered for the adoption to get the adoption. If you have these three layers, right, then you can either creating some product on top of it will be even quicker actually to get it to the market.
So why build this? Why not just do bespoke? I mean, it's a great point. So what we're talking about is, you could wait for SaaS apps to build these features, but ultimately, and I'm a big believer in this, I think if you want real return, you're going to want to leverage it for some of your key differentiated types of processes. But what does it take? I mean, I know a lot of people use ChatGPT and they think it's just a hosted model, but isn't there a lot of pieces behind session memory and chat history? And what are the pieces that go into actually just building even a simple application?
Yeah. Well, we can think of this as like, if you say like 100% is needed for application, you can think of like AWS, other providers like GCP, Azure. They provide this 0 to 60, right? And then from 60 to 90, these are all like common components needed for GenAI or any kind of application development, right? Then the last 10% is the application layer, right now. This 30%, like 60 to 90%, you can think of like companies like Databricks, Snowflake, and then few other companies, right, providing that some kind of storage space. Similarly, in the GenAI space, there is also like companies like Spice AI, a few other guys, right? They provide the middle layer on top of it, and even like LangChain, all those things, right? The last 10% is always the application that you need to develop. So the CSPs, like cloud providers, may go up to some level above 60, but there's a huge area like it still need to be covered by the middle layers. That's where the advantages also for the startups or the newer companies forming in that particular area, right? And like you mentioned, that maybe the secret sauce or the mode for the companies to build on top of it, because the evaluation framework. So even though there is like multiple evaluation frameworks like DeepEval, LangFuse, and all these things. Every problem is slightly different, and it's also evolving very quickly, right? Having that mode, like the evaluation framework mode, it's going to be the key actually for the products to, if you look from the quality point of view, particularly in healthcare, finance, the quality is the main thing, like what Bhavesh was saying, like anything above 90, 95, 98, right? If you're doing a patient summarization, I think the accuracy need to be really, really high. We don't want to miss anything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about the cloud service providers, the AWS's, Azure, GCP, et cetera, Google. Do we just wait for those, if they're getting to 60%, do we wait for it to get up higher? Will it ever get past that 60%?
Yeah, my take in that one is maybe they won't actually, because their main goal is to improve the usage, right? So that's the reason why they are climbing above 60 also, like getting closer to the application layer, right? But again, if they make it too closer, and then they will lose the generalization, right? So that will go counterintuitive on their process there. So I think they will definitely do well and better, like in the old EC2 from the early 2000 to now, right? There's a lot of features like managed services and all these things are there. But again, this middle layer is still like, we need to build it. Startups will build it.
No, in fact, let me latch on to what Selvan just said. There is going to be a fundamental conflict between generalizability and how effective you want your application to be. For example, you can go to ChatGPT today. In fact, you can pick the worst model, 3.5. I mean, it's crazy now saying it's the worst model out there. But you can, you can give it any large text and it will summarize it for you. And it does a pretty decent job. However, it may lead you to believe that you can throw any text and it will give you accurate summary. And that is a mistake. Because now, let's say, take patient summarization, for example, right? How compressed do you want your summary to be? Does it need to go from 4,000 words to 400 words or less? That depends on the use case. How complete does the summary need to be? Can it leave out a couple of serious issues? However, the summary of whatever issues are captured is correct. Perhaps not. What is the structure of that summary? Will a human who is reading that summary find it as useful as he or she found the summary written by another human person? And the usefulness is a qualitative metric. I would also say it speaks to somewhat of an alignment issue here as well. But ultimately, what we want the summary to do is to enable this professional to take next set of actions. All of this come in the specialized category of your business, your use case. I don't think any foundational model company will be incentivized to solve this because they are incentivized for generalizability. I would rather invest, if I'm OpenAI, I would rather invest in model that does decent enough job, great enough job for healthcare and marketing and legal and customer support and a million other industry versus solving your particular use case to 95% accuracy.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I think you talked about like parsing. I mean, this kind of raises the question too. We haven't gotten to costs yet, but at some point, will you be using different models? Do you foresee people, companies using different models based on the use case, almost routing, queries on a model basis? Do you see that happening? Anybody?
I mean, even outside the cost consideration, there are reasons for that. So, for example, folks who have tried Owen or Owen Preview, I mean, it's certainly the most advanced model out there with respect to reasoning capability, but it's super slow. Now, imagine integrating that model for your customer support chatbot. Customer, when or any chatbot for that matter, a customer types something and they have to wait 30, 40 seconds. That's not chat. That's messaging or email kind of response. At the same time, you don't want to just because you have a hammer doesn't mean every problem is a nail. You don't want the biggest and the most expensive, often the slowest model to solve some of your most trivial use cases. It's just not a wise cost strategy for you to see.
Another angle on the cloud service providers, while they give you choice, and what I find very interesting, and I find people aren't talking as much about this as I would have expected from my experience, but the foundational model creators are so aligned with the CSPs, with the cloud service providers. Do we see any issues there? Any concerns at Uber or G around that kind of thing? Are the models the same if one cloud provider says, okay, we provide all these models, is it the same as, going directly to the model? Like, AWS provides OpenAI services, for example. Is that the same model as OpenAI provides?
Yeah, I think one critical point is when you take things to production, we need to tie it to a specific version of the model, right? So cloud providers definitely provide the models to that, right? Then there's a version maintenance timeline there right now.
Right.
Azure does say like, hey, we are going to deprecate this particular version of GPT, right? And then you have this much time to change it. Now it comes back to your production pipeline, how much time you have to do all the testing and then release it along with that, right? That's where I think the pros and cons on that part, like whether you want to host it in your private tenant, versus using the general serverless model kind of thing they provide, right? Then also the cost wise, also internal tools versus external, right? There's like NVIDIA DGX boxes, like some companies uses like for internal use cases, right? It makes more sense for them to do that part instead of externalizing it, because the data also stays within. Now there's a egress cost and all these things comes with the cloud providers that you can overcome it.
Explain the egress cost. What do you mean by the egress cost?
Oh yeah. So if you take data out of the cloud to your on-prem, and there's a egress cost associated with it, with most of the cloud providers.
Yeah.
That's actually adds up quite a bit. Depends on the type of data that you have.
But not just on-prem, right? I mean, it could be private cloud going to another another model service on another cloud service provider, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything out of a specific CSP,
right.
For the major ones I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Please go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't. We can continue. So let's shift gears a little bit on, the other big thing that, big concern that we hear about all the time is data privacy and security, right? So a lot of enterprises have their own identity and access management systems. Correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, this might be a good one for Ted, but if you're now technically you're ragging, let's say, your data, and you have to put that in a vector database, aren't you creating copies of that data? How do we manage the rights in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, I mean, being in security for the last couple decades, this is a big one for me in development of an app or a product. So I think it's interesting, right? It's funny how no one talks about the loss of context of your security when you rag an app, rag data. So let's say like you have a data, like a file share of all this data in your company, and you find you're hearing a lot about the value of, hey, I just want to talk to that data. But once you process that data, normalize that data, dump it into a vector database, those privileges that were attached with those files are missing, right? So that's something that I think people need to really take into consideration is, what mechanisms do I use to apply those same privileges to that same data set? And you can do it. It's just something that no one really talks about. So I think that's a major concern, and that's the answer, right? So people are like, oh, what about privacy and security? That's something that needs to be handled properly.
Yeah, and Bhavesh or Selvan, do you have anything to add to that? Any thoughts on how that's handled?
Yeah, absolutely. Like what Ted was saying, right? Even if you have a RAG system for internal use cases, there need to be different. There is different level of data, critical, highly confidential, those kind of things, right? How do you upload it? Who can upload it? And who can access it? Actually, access it back in the vector format, right? There need to be role-based access and all these things. Then also audit trail, like what happened when, kind of thing, on top of it, right? And then the operational thing on top of it also, it's pretty critical, right? Those are role-based access, all these things are pretty critical. Then there is like additional things are like whether when you get the data, do you need to de-identify certain things? Others depends on the use case. Also, it can potentially get complicated right away.
Yeah, I mean, like Amazon has their IAM, Azure has their IAM. Those components can be tied into it. It's just a matter of being aware that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. That's part of that 60 to 90% that you're talking about, Selvan?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, great. So how about accuracy, right? That's another big one. Critical component. I don't know if you saw if you've heard in the consumer space, Character AI has new lawsuits. Telling the kids that it's okay to kill his parents, and pretty scary stuff. So, how do you measure and ensure the accuracy of Gen AI models? Bhavesh has already mentioned how they're stochastic, non-deterministic in nature. We've talked a little bit about it, but any additional thoughts on how to ensure that accuracy?
So, and I think it also ties to some of the learning that I've seen at Uber across the industry as well. Product pushing GenAI products to production has been one of the most labor-intensive journey that I have undertaken. The promise, of course, here is you throw data at model and gives you perfect answers, and maybe you are done. The reality, however, is you need to have a range of questions that you are gonna pose it to the model, expected answers, seemingly by experts. Run it against those models multiple times with multiple variation. Evaluate and rank those answers either using even more expensive model as a judge, or expert or subject matter experts. Do that for each language that you want to support, for each sort of use case that you want to support. Use it before launch. Use it and do this on pretty much continuous basis.
That's what I was going to ask. Is this just a testing? When you say model as a judge, is this just pre-launch, or are you actually doing in production?
No, very much in production, because there have been reports. I'm sure people on the call have read about it. Model performance is not static. The versions, they do keep getting updated. Of course, you have some control over that. What you don't have control over in most, I would say, chat-like interfaces is the range of questions people are going to ask you. And there are a lot of tips and tricks around how to jailbreak models and prompts. So definitely don't want your business secrets around. And it's not just about what goes inside the model. I think what ultimately you want to protect is what comes out of the models. And it's not only needs to be accurate, but it needs to be respectful, absent of any toxic content, etc. So it needs continuous monitoring, and any lags, and you have to be rest assured that there are hobbyists or even bad actors across the internet who are trying to undermine your business by and they are using AI to counter your AI product. So that's exactly why you will need to continuous investments here to make sure the accuracy continues to be higher and inches higher with every iteration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the ML ops for the GenAI thing, it's a different level actually on the real time monitoring and things like that. Even for just for summarization, you look at multiple scores, right? So you have a coverage score, how well the summary is captured, and then there's an alignment score, factual consistency between the summary and the original text, right? And then there's a fluency score, a coherence score, and then there's a relevance score. All these things, right? There are different metrics mathematically you can do to some level. Then the guardrails comes into the picture there. So how do you guard it in a way so it doesn't go overboard? And you just want to make it, controllable to some extent, so that we don't get into the scenarios like where it can just answer some questions which are not even meant to be right. So that how we control that, it's itself is an engineering task by itself. Like on the guardrailing and the red teaming part.
Here's something you talked about, building a platform, Bhavesh, platform thinking. One of the things I often wonder about is the guardrails that you're mentioning. Does that get reinvented? I mean, each application, does that become part of the platform? What did you see at GE and Uber?
That's a common component, I think, in that, and then depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. That will be
right.
more, so that's also part of the red teaming exercises that we do. Just like we do game day before we release, right? There is also a red teaming exercise within the company. Like we should try to break it as much as possible, and based on the results, that will keep improving. Then the ML ops, real-time ML ops feedback also need to be there. Like it's also just similar to when the service availability goes down, we cut a serve-to ticket, right? Similar to that, there is an issue that we find that we should escalate it and then address it right away. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you had mentioned some of the metrics around summarization. I was wondering also about performance metrics. Are there other performance metrics people should be thinking about?
Yeah. As an ML ops and then like a generic SaaS ops kind of thing, right? The performance metrics somewhat captured by that. But like you mentioned, there's an overlap on the ML ops side, right? Because one of the metric we also need to capture is the cost actually. Is it within the range? And those kind of things are additional actually. Now the tokens we are generating is more than what is needed. So those kind of additional metrics. Then in case of ensemble models, right? I think you mentioned a little bit before, whether we use one model for specific things. In reality, we use multiple models. We did a classifier which kind of uses a ton of data, and then it goes to this smarter model for specific instances, right? Then how we route it and orchestrate it, right? That also gives additional metrics. That gives us more information on how to improve the product.
Right.
So there's quite a lot of things we need to dig in on that particular part.
I just noticed we're at 146. We told the audience we'd go to 145. So if anybody has any questions, I don't see any in the Q&A session yet. We received a lot of beforehand as part of a registration as well. But if any of the attendees have questions, feel free to post them here. Otherwise, we'll continue through the end of the hour. I think panelists, we allocated time, right? So we'll just continue through and don't feel obligated for the attendees. We did set it to 145. So for those who'd like to stay, feel free. So, any other, it looked like Bhavesh, maybe you were going to say something there, but we were talking about the guardrails. How about, costs, right? So I think to me, we were talking about ROI. Are there other thoughts around, costs and other things to think about around costs? I know that, in some cases you can get dedicated instances, you can.
Yeah, so I think that many cost is always going to be the important consideration, it being the one of the two parameters of the ROI equation we started the discussion with. I have sort of two contrasting thoughts on cost I wanted to share. First is it's absolutely critical to have cost attribution for each of your GenAI experiments so that you at least are aware and able to guide strategically your investments into tech in this area. At the same time, and I've seen this thinking applied, becoming cost conscious too early can lead to premature death of some of your experiments. And I think the real way out of this is if you adopt some of the platform thinking to your experimentation, it will not your executive sleepless nights. I don't know how much money we are burning, and I don't know where that money is going up. You have that attribution and reporting available at your fingertips. And as you start seeing the product market fit or the use case with the given accuracy or performance characteristics starting to hit, you can then aggressively start cost optimization strategy. Again, taking the summarization example, let's say you took the biggest model out there, GPT-4o, and made it work, and you're quite happy with the summary. Can you achieve the same outcome now with a cheaper model or a distilled model? But going with a small model and then investing a lot more time into improving the accuracy, it's often counterproductive, and sometimes you walk away with that disillusionment that GenAI is all hype and there's no real value in it. So that's why a thoughtful approach to cost is warranted here.
So why not just? So it's interesting. I mean, can you? I think maybe you sort of answered this, but I guess I was going to ask, why not just stick with an AI as a service? I'm trying. It's the 12 days of OpenAI, so I don't want to pick on OpenAI, but what I mean is like the hosted private models. Why not just go with the leading AI as a service and just don't think about it anymore? Just run with that.
Yeah. So my answer to that is most people are, I think, not fully aware that when they are, let's say you go with OpenAI, what exactly are you getting from OpenAI? Most people say, oh, well, I'm getting access to their latest and greatest models. Yes, but on what cloud? Well, that's an OpenAI cloud. Has your security engineering team vetted that cloud for their data practices? So, for example, many applications may require encryption on wire, encryption of data at rest, and you should do an independent assessment across Oracle, Google, AWS, OpenAI, Azure, and find out whether that cloud meets your enterprise security requirements. If it does, okay, now let's go to the other. What else are you getting as part of API access? Well, you are also getting the cloud performance characteristic. Well, what does it mean for LLMs? Well, it means, how many tokens per minute are you going to be able to transact? Is that good enough for you? And that will be a different consideration. Let's say you go with OpenAI today and you're quite happy with it. Anthropic makes a breakthrough which will accelerate your business outcomes by 10x. Do you wait for OpenAI to innovate and catch up? And why? And I think.
So I mean, we're talking about sort of model lock-in at some point, right? If you're developing the different APIs, and the application logic potentially changes as well, doesn't it? Based on
absolutely. I mean, of course, again, how much of your application logic needs to change depends on how you build this application. Was it bespoke, or did you actually leverage platform components? If it was latter, then it can be relatively simple, straightforward answer for you.
I know, Ted, you might have some thoughts on the security side. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. On the, back in the RAG context again, it's the encryption I think is important because there's data in the vector database, and like Bhavesh is saying, how do you know how they handled it, right? Yeah, they can do an LLM really well, which is their business, but how do they secure that data, right? If I'm uploading data, is that all encrypted? Do I get a key that I can control what, who sees what? I think those are, pretty important things, especially like when you RAG a document, there's some reference to that original chunk of data that you created an embedding for, right? Like, where is that? And it's referenced somewhere in that vector database. How does all that happen? And then, that data is, important data. It's data that I put in another system. Yeah, I think it should be encrypted.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to get to one question that came in here before we go, and let's see. What do you think? Oh yeah, what do you think of the agent? There's so much talk about agents, right? I knew this was going to come up. So what do you think of agentic products that have come up recent months? Where do they fit in with Selvan's 60 analogy?
Very good question. The CSPs and cloud providers already started creating their own frameworks, and there is like a ton of open source frameworks. It's somewhere like slightly above 60, and then the 30%. Right? This is a common thing there, right? So I would say it's in the 30%, the common component side. But again, there are abstractions on top of it also people build nowadays, right? So for your use case, so think of network devices, agents as like network devices at this point, right? Every network devices has its own purpose in its own way, right? Where they sit, whether they sit in the border, or they sit in the routing layer, or they sit in the action layer, whether these agents listen to all the messages or only some of the messages for the final decision, right? So all those layers, it definitely, sits in the 30% of the layer, on top of, and the application is the final one which makes the decision on that.
Yeah, thank you. So, just in the last few minutes, let's talk about future proofing. How do you ensure you're building, the application that you build internally, that you're going to take advantage of the enhancements that happen with AI, and you don't get stuck like we've talked about in some of the lock-in issues?
To add to Bhavesh's point, right? Things changes all the time, and now it's the time, everything is changing very quickly. So creating an abstraction layer, it's pretty critical for most of the use cases, right? So how much change you need to make when the things below it will change, right? We can reduce it. We can minimize the impact of it to some level, because this world of new LLMs, multimodal, is going to change quite a bit in the next few months to a year, right? So that's a critical part. Then there's a competitive advantage of doing that also, right? How quick you can ship the product, right? Then tying back to the evaluation loop and all these things also matters quite a bit, actually. You develop along with the evaluation loop.
Bhavesh, I'll give you a chance. I know you said this laptop, I think your computer's getting low on battery, so you want to jump in on any of that, Bhavesh, before?
Yeah, I think
So-
there are a couple of questions here related, I would say, agentic revolution that we are going to see, although nobody seems to agree on that definition itself. I do believe um, in 2025, we are going to see a lot more real implementation emerge when it comes to around agent. And, my conceptual framework of thinking about agent, just so that everybody's on the same page, borrowed from, Anthropic and OpenAI, is imagine you have, a program that makes bunch of function calls, but that is driven by LLMs. They not only have a ability to go through that program and invoke those bunch of functions, but also invoke another agent as one of those functions. And now imagine a bunch of agents collaborating to solve a particular use case, and maybe the supervisory agent is the one which is planning, reasoning. It's farming out the work to a bunch of smaller agents, coordinating. Similar to how a human would apply their agency to solve a relatively complex use case. And everything that we have talked about, what does it mean for cost? What does it mean for ROI? How do you go about reusability? What is the right abstraction layer? Becomes not only relevant, but even more important.
Yeah, thank you. I have one other question that came in. Actually, it ties into something I forgot to ask you. It says here, it's a little long. In order to take the most advantage of GenAI, it's important to connect the LLM to enterprise data sources across collaboration, G Suite, Office Suite, communication, Teams, Slack, document repository, SharePoint, Confluence, dev tools, Bugzilla, Jira, and several other unique proprietary data sources that may be sitting in silos. How can a company quickly integrate these sources of data with the LLM to be able to generate accurate results with reduced or no hallucinations? This is one of the things I was thinking about too, right? If you're waiting for these SaaS applications to add capabilities, you end up still with silos, and don't you miss out on potentially having AI make inferences across those data silos? Anybody have any thoughts on this question?
I would start with what is the main problem we are trying to solve with using this data, right? I will start from that and start with the significant problem that you want to solve, and then use that. For solving that problem, we not need all the data, right? So that I will start from that so that you can scope down to what you want to achieve. Then your P&L also looks good, and then
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, there have been some success in the SaaS vendor category as well. Glean, which has streamlined internal search across all of your internal data, is a great example. But again, they are solving one specific use case for you. Because you have so much data at your disposal, you can solve many business problems for yourself. And in my opinion, you might be waiting forever, potentially for a solution to come, and potentially a competitor to disrupt you, because they leverage that data and out-innovated you all the way from internal productivity to the customer-facing feature.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're out of time here. I want to thank the panel. Thank you very much, Bhavesh, Selvan, Theodore. Thank you very much for this. Hopefully, attendees, you found this useful. I'm going to put up my contact information. I know we couldn't get to everybody's question. If you have additional questions, you'd like to follow up, we are doing also free consults for folks. Let me make sure I can share this properly. Feel free to reach out. And thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to hear from you. I'll leave this up for a couple minutes. Thank you, panel.
All right. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.